The sound of an explosion as France played Germany in soccer at Le Stade de France in Paris. We welcome you back to Newsmax TV's continuing coverage of this developing story. Multiple terror attacks in Paris, dozens killed, hostages taken at a concert hall, several different venues suffering attacks. Suffice to say that Friday the 13th brought a night of terror to Paris. Welcome back to our coverage. I'm J.D. Hayworth. It is worth noting that French President Hollande was at that soccer game. He rushed back to the Ministry of the Interior in Paris and then addressed the French people on nationwide TV. Here is what President Hollande had to say. Terrorist attacks of unprecedented scale are underway. There have been dozens of deaths. There are many injured. It is a horror, said French President Hollande, who added that this was a terrible trauma for France. Across the Atlantic, here in the United States, in the White House press briefing room, late this afternoon, our commander-in-chief stepped to the microphones to express his sorrow and the solidarity of the American people with our French allies.
France is our oldest ally. The French people have stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States time and again. And we want to be very clear that we stand together with them in the fight against terrorism and extremism. Paris itself represents the timeless values of human progress. Those who think that they can terrorize the people of France or the values that they stand for are wrong.
Earlier this evening, we spoke with the former director of the NSA and CIA, General Michael Hayden, from Newsmax, Washington, and we discussed any potential warning signs leading up to tonight's attacks and where France needs to go from here. We're still trying to get a handle on this, but I'm just going to ask you to think back in your memory over the last 10 days. Any indication, any increase in chatter, anything you heard, any thread of something that might have tipped something like this off?
I'm not aware, JD, but then again, I'm out of government, all right? But just think back to the question you just asked me and play it back not 10 days, but 14. Go back 2 weeks. JD, in the time period of a fortnight, we've had a Russian airliner go down. We've had massive suicide bombings in Beirut, and now we have these very unhappy events taking place in Paris. Now, there's still questions about each of them, but it is not an illogical conclusion that we might end up finding out that each one of these has been conducted and directed, or at least inspired, by ISIS. And when you step back, JD, and look at that over a 14-day period, it suggests we've entered into a completely different phase of evil coming from this group.
General, we've discussed that there was multiple attacks, as many as 60 people are dead, but there are still 100 hostages in that theater. I know you're not a French authority, but what is going on right now, your best estimation, to get those people out safely?
Well, Miranda, the real answer is I don't know, but let me go on to say that the French are good at this. The French security services are tough and they're professional. So they'll do what the situation calls for. I think they'll certainly be professional. I think they'll be patient. But the French, if the scenario calls for action, the French will act. This is a very good force. They had our highest regard when we worked with them when I was in government.
And for those still in government, our commander-in-chief was in front of the cameras just a little while ago to talk about what transpired. Let's listen to more of what President Obama had to say earlier tonight.
France is our oldest ally. The French people have stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States time and again. And we want to be very clear that we stand together with them in the fight against terrorism and extremism. Paris itself represents the timeless values of human progress. Those who think that they can terrorize the people of France or the values that they stand for are wrong.
Mike, as we come back to you in Newsmax, Washington, I just want to ask you, in terms of, and I'm trying to find the right way to put this, obviously, every time there is one of these events, it is a learning situation. There are takeaways. Of course, the French went through Charlie Hebdo back in January. What were their takeaways, or what were your takeaways in terms of dealing with these urban attacks in a place like Paris?
Yeah, actually what I took away, JD, from the Charlie Hebdo attack, that the French, as good as they were, they had exhausted their resources. The scale of potential threats had grown so large that the Charlie Hebdo folks, the attackers, were on the French radar. They just didn't have the resources of the legal authorities to either survey them or to arrest them. The French have a very serious problem. They have a large Islamic immigrant community, and before anyone makes any conclusions, I'm not blaming the Islamic community. But there is a large community there, JD, and frankly, it is not assimilated into French society. They feel isolated in the broader French culture, which gives France, because of the numbers, and because, frankly, of that lack of assimilation, a far greater problem than we've ever had here in the United States. This is going to be the problem from hell for the French security services and, frankly, for the French political structure and the French people. What do we now do with the presence of this kind of threat, which has raised its head now multiple times inside of French society? How do we deal with this threat and not change our DNA as a free people?
Former Director of Central Intelligence and the former Director of the National Security Agency, General Michael Hayden, with us on Newsmax TV earlier this evening. You heard Mike describe this as the problem from hell for French authorities. And again, if you're just joining us, let's repeat what happened. France rocked tonight by multiple nearly simultaneous attacks on entertainment sites around Paris. French media reporting that at least 60 people dead and hostages held in a concert hall. Now, French TV is reporting that the siege involving the hostages at the concert hall has ended. It is over. But as this is a developing story, we are just getting details. We understand 2 attackers in that concert hall have been killed. They are dead. French radio reported earlier tonight that one of the attackers in the midst of the performance stood up with a pump-action shotgun, and before shooting indiscriminately, those assembled at a rock concert uttered these words: "This is for Syria. This is for Syria." We began our time together at the top of the hour seeing that dramatic footage of the Germany-France soccer game at Le Stade de France in Paris. And it is worth noting that even though we heard the explosions in that video, the game continued. The game was played until its conclusion, and then spectators gathered on the pitch. What you and I, as we Americanize this international game of football to soccer here, what we would call the soccer field. The spectators came down onto the field as security officials were trying to deal with this. We mentioned another scene of an attack, and here is that footage again of the friendly soccer match where there was the explosion and where that match continued until its conclusion. I made mention of the fact that French President Hollande left that soccer match, returned to the Ministry of the Interior, and addressed the French people. He called it a night of horror. Certainly the date, Friday the 13th, will be in France what September 11th is in the United States. More coverage later tonight on Newsmax Prime at 8 o'clock Eastern. For now, J.D. Hayworth. Stay brave, stay free, stay tuned.